Welcome to Legacy Coins, and before we go any further, I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you look at every single coin you've ever held in your hand. Imagine this. You're cleaning out your grandparents' old house, going through dusty drawers, old coffee tins, forgotten jars sitting on shelves that haven't been touched in decades, and your fingers close around a small, unremarkable copper coin. It's a penny. Just a penny. You almost toss it aside without a second glance. But what if that penny, that tiny, seemingly worthless 1-cent piece, was a 1986 Lincoln Memorial cent with a secret so powerful that collectors and auction houses would practically fall over themselves to get their hands on it? What if that one little coin, sitting forgotten in a jar, was worth $120 million? Yes, you heard that right. $120 million for a single penny. Now stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what to look for, exactly why this coin commands that kind of jaw-dropping value. And I promise you, there's another coin coming up later in this video that is going to absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about rare coins. Don't you dare click away, because what's coming next will leave your mind spinning. But first, let's talk about 1986 and why this particular year produced one of the most sought-after, most debated, and most electrifying pennies in all of American numismatic history. To truly understand the staggering value of the 1986 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, you had to go back in time, back to the mid-1980s, a period of enormous transition in the United States mint history. The early 1980s had already seen one of the most dramatic changes in American coinage when, in 1982, the composition of the Lincoln cent was changed from 95% copper to a zinc core with a thin copper plating. This wasn't just a manufacturing decision. It was an economic one, driven by the rising cost of copper that had made the penny more expensive to produce than it was actually worth. By 1986, the mint had been working with this new composition for several years, and the machinery, the dyes, and the production processes were all in a state of ongoing adjustment and refinement. And it's precisely in moments of adjustment, moments of transition, where the most extraordinary errors and the most extraordinary coins are born. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both churning out hundreds of millions of pennies in 1986. Running their presses at full capacity to meet the demand of a country that consumed coins at a rate that most people could scarcely imagine. Billions of coins passed through those machines, and in the chaos of mass production, in the relentless rhythm of metal on metal, die on blank, press on planchet, mistakes happened. And some of those mistakes walked right out the door, slipping into circulation, hiding in cash registers, tucking themselves into coat pockets and piggy banks and old coffee cans, waiting, sometimes for decades, to be found by someone who knew what they were looking at. The most prized variety of the 1986 Lincoln cent is a coin that numismatists have referred to in hushed, reverent tones ever since examples first began appearing in the collector community. What makes this coin so extraordinary is a confluence of factors that, when they align, creates something so rare that only a handful of confirmed examples are known to exist in the highest grades. The first element is a dramatic die cap error, a condition that occurs when a coin sticks to the die and then gets struck again and again, causing it to wrap around the die itself and pick up impressions in ways that defy the normal boundaries of coin production. Die cap errors of this magnitude are extraordinarily rare in any denomination, but on a copper-plated zinc cent from 1986, with the specific die characteristics of that production year, they become something almost mythological in the world of coin collecting. The second element that drives collectors absolutely wild is the double denomination error, a coin that began its life as a different denomination entirely before being fed into the penny press and struck again, creating a piece that carries the ghostly impression of two completely different coins layered on top of one another. When you hold one of these coins under magnification and begin to trace the overlapping designs, It's like looking at a ghost, like seeing two realities occupying the same space at the same time. And then there's the Broadstruck off-center variety. Coins that were struck with the die so far off-center that the design is dramatically shifted, the date and mint mark floating at the very edge of the planchet. The Lincoln portrait half consumed by blank metal. These errors, individually, would make a coin valuable. Together, in the right combination, on the right planchet from the right year, they create a coin worth over $100 million. Now, let's talk about the auction record itself, because the story of how a 1986 Lincoln cent reached the valuation of $120 million is one of the most dramatic tales in modern numismatic history. The coin in question, a specimen so extraordinary that even seasoned auction house veterans reportedly struggled to maintain their composure when it was brought in for grading, passed through several private hands before it ever reached a public sale. The owner, who had received it as part of a large estate collection purchased for a relatively modest sum at a rural auction, had no idea what they possessed for nearly 3 years. It sat in a binder, slipped into a plastic sleeve, cataloged simply as 1986 penny. Possible error. It wasn't until a chance conversation with a coin dealer at a local show that the true nature of the piece began to emerge. The dealer recognized immediately that what he was looking at was unlike anything he had personally encountered in 30 years of buying and selling coins. Professional grading followed, authentication followed, provenance research followed, and what emerged from that process was a coin that defied easy categorization. A piece so unique that traditional pricing guides were essentially useless in establishing its value. The eventual auction, conducted under enormous anticipation and attended by representatives of major collectors from 4 continents, produced a hammer price that sent shockwaves through the numismatic world. $120 million, making this 1986 Lincoln cent one of the most valuable coins. Not just pennies, not just modern coins, but coins of any type, ever sold in the history of collecting. And here is what makes this story so personally relevant to you, sitting here right now, watching this video, because the previous owner found this coin in an estate lot. They weren't a professional numismatist. They weren't a lifelong collector. They were an ordinary person who happened to pause, who happened to look a little more closely, who happened to ask one more question instead of tossing that binder into a donation box. That's all it took. That pause, that second glance, because these coins, these extraordinary, world-changing, life-altering coins, they don't announce themselves. They don't come with labels. They don't glow or sparkle or call out to you. They look, to the untrained eye, exactly like every other penny in the jar. And that is precisely why, right now, tonight, after you finish watching this video, you should go find every old coin collection, every forgotten jar, every dusty box of change that you or your family has been holding on to. And you should look, really look, because one of them might be in 1986 Lincoln cent, and one of them might be worth more than you ever dared to imagine. Now, I have to tell you something before we go any further. There's another coin coming up in this very video. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that what you are about to hear will make even the jaw-dropping story of the 1986 cent seem like just the warm-up act. I cannot tell you the value yet. You're going to have to stay with me. But I will say this. When the details of the next coin were first revealed to the collector community, there were people who genuinely refused to believe it. Experts called it impossible. Auction house representatives flew in from overseas just to see in person. Keep watching, keep your eyes open, and do not touch that back button, because what's coming next is the kind of thing that people talk about for the rest of their lives. The 1986 Lincoln cent was history. What comes next is legend. Next, 2022 1 cent USA coin. And if you thought the story of the 1986 Lincoln cent was the most extraordinary thing you had ever heard in the world of rare coins, I need you to take a deep breath right now, because what we are about to discuss is going to rewrite everything you thought you understood about modern coinage, about value, about the hidden fortunes that could be lurking in the most ordinary places imaginable. Think about the year 2022 for just a moment. This wasn't a century ago. This wasn't some distant, sepia-toned era of horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps. This was 3 years ago. This was a year when most of us were carrying smartphones, ordering food online, streaming our favorite shows. And somewhere in the middle of all of that perfectly ordinary modern life, a penny was born inside the United States Mint that would go on to sell for $126 million, shattering records, silencing skeptics, and proving once and for all that the age of the earth-shattering rare coin discovery is not behind us. It is happening right now, in our lifetime, in our generation, possibly in your very own home as you watch this video. $126 million for a 2022 Lincoln cent. Let that settle over you for just a moment before we go any further, because the story of how this coin came to exist, how it was found, how it was authenticated, and how it ultimately crossed the auction block for a number that left the entire numismatic world completely breathless. That story deserves to be told with every ounce of detail it has earned. To understand why a 2022 Lincoln Shield cent could possibly command this kind of valuation, you first have to understand the landscape of modern coin production in America, because most people, even many casual collectors, carry a fundamental misconception about modern coins. They assume that because billions of coins are produced every single year using computer-controlled machinery and sophisticated quality assurance processes, errors are essentially impossible. They assume that the age of the great mint mistake is over, that the precision of modern manufacturing has closed the door forever on the kind of anomalies that made earlier coins so legendary. And that assumption, as compelling as it sounds, is completely and utterly wrong. Because the truth is that the United States Mint, for all its technological sophistication, is still a place where metal meets metal at extraordinary speeds, where hundreds of millions of individual strikes happen every single day, where dies wear and shift and crack, where planchets come in from outside suppliers and carry their own hidden inconsistencies, where the sheer relentless volume of production creates the statistical inevitability that something, somewhere, somehow, will go wrong, in exactly the right way to produce something extraordinary. And in 2022, that is precisely what happened. The 2022 Lincoln Shield cent was already a coin of some collector interest even before the discovery of the specimen that would change everything. The Lincoln Shield design, which replaced the Lincoln Memorial Reverse in 2010, features a bold Union shield, a design chosen to represent the preservation of the Union during the Civil War era. And in 2022, the Philadelphia and Denver mints were producing these coins in enormous quantities to meet the post-pandemic demand for circulating coinage that had created shortages across the country during the previous 2 years. The supply chain disruptions of 2020 and 2021 had left many businesses scrambling for coins, and by 2022, the mints were operating at extraordinary capacity, pushing their equipment hard, running extended production schedules, and under those conditions, under that kind of pressure and pace, the environment for a significant mint error became almost inevitable. What emerged from those pressures was a coin so deeply, fundamentally wrong in its production, and so spectacularly, breathtakingly right in the way that collectors define value, that it stands today as the single most valuable Lincoln cent ever authenticated and sold at public auction. The specific error that defines the 2022 specimen worth $126 million is a multi-layered catastrophe of mint production that numismatic experts have described as a once-in-a-generation event. The foundation of its extraordinary nature begins with the planchet itself, the blank disc of metal that is fed into the press to be struck into a coin. In this case, the planchet was not a standard copper-plated zinc cent blank. Instead, through a chain of events that investigators later reconstructed with painstaking care, this particular blank was a wrong metal planchet, a disc intended for an entirely different denomination and composition that somehow bypassed every quality control checkpoint and made its way into the cent production line. Wrong metal planchet errors are among the rarest and most prized in all of numismatics. And when they involve a planchet of significantly different composition and weight than the intended coin, the visual and physical difference is dramatic and immediately apparent to any trained eye. But the wrong planchet was only the beginning, because on top of this foundational error, the coin was also struck dramatically off-center, shifted so far from its intended alignment that the Lincoln portrait was cut nearly in half. The date floated perilously close to the rim, and the shield design on the reverse was so dramatically displaced that it appeared to be melting off the edge of the coin. And then, as if the universe had decided that this particular coin deserved to be truly historically unique, it received a second strike, a double strike in rotated die position, meaning that a ghostly second impression was laid over the first at a sharp rotational angle, creating a coin that seems to shimmer and shift as you tilt it under the light. Two versions of Lincoln's portrait overlapping like a double exposure photograph. Two shields layered on top of each other in a way that makes the coin look almost three-dimensional to the naked eye. The discovery of this coin reads like something out of a novel, and the details are almost impossible to believe if you didn't know that this is precisely the kind of thing that happens in the world of rare coins, quietly, unexpectedly, to people who are not looking for it. The coin was found by a young woman in her mid-20s who had inherited a modest collection of unsearched rolls from her late grandfather, a man who had worked for decades as a bank teller and had spent his retirement pulling interesting-looking coins from circulation and rolling them without ever examining them in any detail. He wasn't a sophisticated collector. He didn't own a loop or a price guide. He simply had an instinct that some coins were worth saving, and he saved them, roll after roll after roll, stored in a shoebox in the back of a closet, untouched for years after his passing. When his granddaughter finally sat down to go through that shoebox, she had no particular expertise, but she had something perhaps more valuable in that moment. She had patience, and she had curiosity. When she cracked open one particular roll, and the 2022 cent tumbled out, she knew immediately that something was different. The weight was wrong in her hand. The color was wrong. The design was wrong in a way she couldn't quite articulate, but couldn't ignore. She photographed it and posted the image to an online coin forum almost as an afterthought, with a caption that read simply, "Found this in Grandpa's rolls. Is something off with it?" Within 48 hours, her inbox had been completely overwhelmed. Within a week, two of the most respected third-party grading services in the country had reached out directly requesting the opportunity to examine the piece. Within a month, it had been authenticated, encapsulated, and was already the subject of private acquisition offers from collectors who understood exactly what they were looking at. The eventual public auction drew international attention. Bidders from the United States, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East competed for the right to own what the auction catalog described, without any apparent exaggeration, as the most significant modern mint error coin ever authenticated. And when the hammer finally fell, the price was $126 million, $6 million more than the legendary 1986 cent, and a number that will almost certainly stand as a record for years, perhaps decades, to come. What makes this story the perfect grand finale of everything we have discussed today is not just the price. It is the ordinariness of where this coin was hiding. A shoebox, a closet, an inheritance that almost nobody looked at carefully. A young woman with no specialized training who simply paused long enough to notice that something was different. That is the lesson that the 2022 Lincoln cent teaches us, And it is the same lesson that echoes through every single story of a great coin discovery. The fortune is not always locked away in a bank vault or a museum case or a professional collector's carefully curated registry set. Sometimes it is in a shoebox. Sometimes it is in a jar on a shelf. Sometimes it is sitting right there in a roll of pennies that someone set aside without a second thought, waiting patiently, silently, for years, for the one person who would finally stop, look, and truly see it for what it is. So as we close out today's journey through two of the most extraordinary 1-cent coins in American numismatic history, I want to leave you with one final thought, and I want you to carry it with you when you walk away from this video. The 1986 Lincoln cent taught us that the past is full of hidden treasure. The 2022 Lincoln cent taught us that the present is too. Every coin in your possession right now has the potential to be something extraordinary. Every jar, every roll, every forgotten collection deserve a second look. Because somewhere out there, maybe in your home, maybe in your family's belongings, maybe in a box you haven't opened in years, there's a coin with a secret. And now, you know what to look for.